Look at your hands while typing. Do you see anything weird? No? Let me give you a hint. Look at your thumbs. Yup, we use both thumbs to press one single key, the space bar, while your little pinky finger is in charge of more than a gazillion keys. But what if I told you there's a keyboard with 16 keys for your thumbs? Yup, you heard me right, 16 keys. I'm sure your pinky finger will be happy. Thank you. You're my friend. Aw. Hey there, Digmates. I'm Dominique, and today we're going to tell you the development story of the ludicrous Dygma Defy thumb cluster. It all started long ago when you kept requesting us to make a columnar keyboard with extra thumb keys. Most of you already use and love our other keyboard, the Dygma Race, and the thumb cluster is one of its most celebrated features. So it's understandable that you'd want more of them. However, it's a bit more complicated than just adding more keys. Our thumbs have a completely different range of movements than the rest of our fingers. The real challenge is designing keys that suit those movements. And what's the first thing you need to do when faced with a great challenge? You give up! Obviously, you need to research how others have tried to solve it in the past. Looking back at the dawn of ergonomic keyboards in the 70s, we can distinguish two different schools of design. Both have very similar alpha layouts, but distinctive thumb clusters. We call them the thumb block and the thumb curve. Introduced by Maltron in 1977, the thumb block tends to have keys arranged in large clusters with several rows. The idea behind this design is to have a lot of keys close to the thumb in hopes that the user finds the ones that fit them best. On the other hand, the thumb curve, first used by NEC in 1983, is a small cluster of keys following the natural arc of the thumb. Maltron's thumb block can be found in keyboards such as the Kinesis Advantage, the Ergodox, or the Moonlander, while the NEC thumb curve has left its imprint on keyboards such as the Tron, the Ezreal, the Keyboardio models, the Kyria, or the Iris. Each approach has its pros and cons. Pros: the thumb block has more keys. Cons: not all of them are in optimal positions, so only 2 or 3 tend to be easily accessible. Plus, it was designed for concave key wells, so when used on flat keyboards, like the Ergodox, the natural rest position of the thumb is not on the thumb cluster, but the empty space between the cluster and the rest of the key. Why is there no key here? Now the thumb curve. Pros: all the keys are easily accessible as their placement follows the natural movement of the thumbs. Cons: it has fewer keys. Early designs had about 3 or 4 per side. So what if we could develop a design that got the best of both? A curved thumb cluster with many comfortable keys to go around. But that raised the question, what is comfort? How can we measure it? And most importantly, how can we know where to place the thumb keys to achieve optimal comfort? Luckily for us, there have been several studies regarding this topic. To get a general idea, we can use the effort grid, which measures how comfortable it is for us to reach the different keys on a keyboard. As expected, when we move further away from the home row, the effort to reach the keys increases. That's one of the reasons neither the Raise nor the Defy has F keys. This was valuable information, but it wasn't enough for us. If we were to make the most spectacular thumb cluster, we needed specific information in that regard. And since we couldn't find it, we went full Dygma. We conducted as many tests as possible to better grasp how far you can comfortably hit a key with your thumb. We discovered a few interesting things about how different conditions of the user can affect the effort matrix. For example, larger hands, not mine, but larger hands, could reach farther out, while smaller hands, like mine, reached inner positions better. The flexibility of your thumb affects how comfortably you can reach the inner keys. How we place our fingers on the keyboard has a noticeable impact on the comfort of the thumb cluster. If you lay your fingers flat on the keyboard, your thumbs will command a bigger area. With the claw grip, you'll easily reach higher rows, like the number row, but your thumbs will have a reduced area of influence. Finally, how you position your hand affects the arc of the thumb. If you tilt inward, you'll have better access to the outer area. If you have them aligned with the keyboard, you'll reach the inner positions more comfortably. As a result, we had a heat map of where we needed to place the thumb keys so most people could use a good amount of them. Alright, great! Good job! Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you in our next video. Wait! Not so fast! When designing the thumb cluster, it's easy to forget about the rest of the keyboard, and that has terrible consequences. We know this because we've already been there. When developing the shortcut, the first keyboard we designed but never released, we realized how much the pinky and the thumb are actually connected. Hello? Stop calling me! If you think about it, we're making our smallest finger hit a lot of keys that are difficult to reach, and it can't keep up. So whenever we have to press a faraway key with the pinky, we tend to move our whole hand, and subsequently we move the thumb away from the thumb cluster. We also discovered that every time we changed the pinky stagger, the arc of our thumb was different. The more aggressive the pinky stagger, the flatter the arc, and vice versa. With all of that in mind, we developed our theoretical model of what the best thumb cluster would be. We would use the thumb curve model, but try to add a second row of keys to make the most of the thumb's range of movement. We would eliminate the keys that the pinky couldn't reach without moving the hand. This includes the outer columns and the modifier row. And we wanted every user to easily reach at least 4 or 5 keys. But at the same time, all the keys should be easily distinguishable from each other. All the theoretical jobs had been done. Now it was time to get greasy and messy. And who better to talk about this greasy mess than the grease master himself? Not him. I meant our CEO, Luis Sevilla.
Prototypes are basically to validate hypotheses. So this means that the prototypes are going to be messy. We're going to be using components from, it could be keycaps from other keyboards. We're going to be like literally cutting keycaps, cutting in a rough way, whatever, printing, 3D printing components. So the most important thing is speed. The first thing was kind of to validate the hypothesis that we can actually have 2 rows. That was the most important one. We didn't care about the shape of the keyboard, we didn't care about the palm pads and so on. So this was the first one that we did, and actually we realized that it was possible. It was comfortable enough. But this led us to thinking about the curve of the keyboard. And in this one, for example, we actually started curving it more, and we tested it and it was working. Okay, another thing that we were testing in our first prototype is you can maybe check here the pinky stagger is quite aggressive, but actually in the next column is also aggressive, and we realized that reaching the last key was too uncomfortable, so on the next iteration we actually removed it. Also, we were playing around with the position of the pinky keys, so you can see that here are lower and here are higher, and here we didn't, in this first prototype, we didn't add a column, but we realized that it was possible, so we added the inner column on the second prototype. And this we wouldn't call them even the first prototype. This is just like, okay, this is the concept, let's figure out if it works, and it was good enough to move on to the next one. Okay, so these are the official first and second prototypes. Once we validated that actually we can use this 2-row thumb cluster, we kind of went a little bit further. So the first thing is that we realized that we could have more keycaps on the thumb. So we thought that the curve was the right one, and we added like a 5th one on the top side. So by doing this, we actually realized that we needed more space between the keycaps, and actually in the next prototype you can actually see that the keycaps have like more kind of like a pyramid shape, and so there's some more space. And maybe you can see that actually if I'm hitting this one, I'm accidentally hitting this too, but if I'm doing it in this case, actually I'm not doing it, and that's because of the extra space. From the first to the second one, we actually discarded the keys on the edge. It's kind of too uncomfortable to hit them, and you can actually see that here we started working a little bit on aesthetics. So on the second prototype, you see the curve, a very similar curve to the race. Also you can see here on the edge of the keycap that we give it a kind of a little bit of a look. Okay, and a very important thing is that we wanted to know what was the most comfortable position for the keys for every hand. And to do so, we realized that what we needed was to do kind of like a slider. So you can see here that we are starting to have sliders in the prototypes. So this allows us to give a prototype to the tester. And let's say we have 4 positions. So we test the first position with all the buttons in that position, then we move to the right, second position, third position, for 4th position. So this allows us to kind of figure out what's the most comfortable position of the whole thumb cluster for different hand sizes. Okay, so in these prototypes, we are not really focusing on the main block. We're focusing actually on the shape of the keycaps thumb clusters. And you can see that actually we iterated quite a bit. Our idea was that probably if we make the keycaps smaller, we can put all the switches closer, and this will make it easier to move your thumb around. And actually this is true, but the problem is that there's a point that the keycaps are so small that it actually becomes uncomfortable to press them. And there's actually another problem is that we cannot reduce the size of the switches. And there's a point that the keycap is so small that actually compresses all the switches, and you cannot have so many switches on such a small space. So as you can see in the 3rd prototype, we tried these very small keycaps that kind of look like teeth. Not the most beautiful ones, and we were playing around also a little bit with the curve. You can see here that even these keycaps are kind of rounded. We realized that they were just too small, so we created a new iteration, kind of following kind of this trend of the round keycaps, but taking more space. The dimensions were fine, but kind of the shape of the keycaps was not fine, so we were playing around with it. With this, and now we knew that these keycaps were too small, these keycaps were too rounded, that we don't have to put all the switches and keycaps together. We have to give it a little bit more space, and that's what we check in the next prototype. So these are 2 very important prototypes. We iterated quite a bit, and in the previous ones we learned a lot, and these prototypes combine many of the lessons. Okay, so the first thing is about the pinky stagger. So in this one, the A keycap is kind of higher compared to the position of the previous prototypes. And this is the position of the pinky is actually directly connected to the position of the thumb and the curve that the thumb can do. So this was a very important step. Even though it seems tiny, the location of the A key actually changes the curve of the thumb. Okay, so we were all over the place trying to figure out the right dimension of the keycaps, and we're just trying to make them smaller. So we tested making them smaller in this direction, but actually realized that it was interesting to make them smaller in this direction. And the reason behind this is because to reach better the low row, it's beneficial that the top keys are smaller. But making the keycaps smaller in this direction actually meant that the keycaps are so small that they don't fit in the switches. So we had this issue that we had to solve in future prototypes. And one of the very important things that we figured out in this prototype was the merging of these 2 keycaps. Actually, let me show you. So here you can see that these were 2, and we realized that if we want to press them, like the top one is really comfortable, but the bottom one you have to kind of do this weird movement, and it's not that comfortable. Merging them together allows us to just slap the keycap. And actually it was not only about merging these 2 keys. What we did is we merged them, but we squeezed a little bit the other keycaps, because your thumb is dexterous enough to be able to move around this keycap. And actually the shape of these keycaps started to look very close to the final prototype. The dimensions of the keycaps, but also the curvature and the space between all the keycaps. So only these small ones on the top changed a little bit. The bottom ones, this was close to the final design. We were actually satisfied with the solution that we were creating with the thumb cluster, with the curved one. But long time ago, Ray's customer suggested us to create a thumb cluster that actually included an extra key underneath. We thought that we were already prototyping, so why not give it a shot? So the interesting concept behind this is that we're using a Terry stem switch, a low profile, and a laptop switch. So actually this creates 3 levels. I must say that it's kind of interesting, but it's not super comfortable. So I think there's value in this concept, and probably we will explore it in the future, but we decided to kind of move away and go back to the curved one because we think it's more comfortable. Okay, so these are the final prototypes before moving on to the final Defy design. Here we had a few things to work on. First one, the inner column. So when you type with a kind of claw grip or kind of position of your fingers with this curvature, when you hit the thumb keys, your thumb goes over the keycap. So this means that if we had 4 keys, we'd accidentally hit the bottom one. This meant that we couldn't have 4. About the position, reaching kind of the top one, if it's higher, it's not really that comfortable. We tested with 2 keycaps and we realized that 3 was fine. So a good conclusion. So more stuff. We were playing around with the aesthetics. So you can see kind of the corners of these keycaps. You can see that we are playing around with the dimensions. In this case, here's a bit larger. Here it's curved, and also we are playing around a little bit with the other keycaps. But something that drove us nuts was actually this keycap. This is probably one of the places that we spent most time trying to figure out what were not only the right dimensions, the slope, but actually the curve in this side of the keycap. And the reason behind this is, if you're pressing it, it's totally fine. But let's say that you move down to the larger keycap, but now you want to slide to this one. So if there's no curve here, if it's just a standard keycap with kind of like walls, actually your thumb hits the wall. With the thumb, you have to go higher to be able to press the keycap. We were trying to figure out how to create this curve, this slope, but this is difficult because this kind of changes the dimensions of the keycaps, and in some cases it's not, you won't be able to manufacture it. But at the end, through these iterations, we were able to figure a very nice curve that actually you can see it in this keycap. And the last final piece that also drove us kind of nuts is what was the correct slope of the keycaps and what was the correct dimension of the keycap. So through these iterations, we did so many 3D models, so many 3D prints, and we don't have here every single prototype, but at the end of this iteration rounds, we had the final design of the Defy finally.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm ready. The final design of the thumb cluster has 8 keys on each side. 4 on the top row, 3 in the bottom row, and 1 at the tip. The top ones use regular switches, and the lower ones and the tip use low profile switches. We tested the design with many users to ensure we accomplished our main goal, that everybody could reach at least 4 or 5 keys comfortably, regardless of their hand size, the flexibility of their thumbs, or how they place their hand on the keyboard. Maybe the inner ones are less accessible unless you have really flexible thumbs, but the idea is that you use the most comfortable keys for frequent actions such as enter, space, backspaces, modifiers, layer switching, and the rest for other functions like macros or combos. With so many keys, the possibilities are endless, and we are eager to see what you can create with this amazing cluster. And if you already know what you'll use your thumb keys for, let us know in the comments below. As always, don't forget, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we publish our next video. We still have to talk about many development stories, like the legends on the keycaps, the RGBW underglow, and much, much more. This is all for today. Go tell your pinky the good news and start training your thumbs. Wait, for all of you guys who stayed till the last part of this video, how do you turn this into a star?